And Ken will tell us when we're live.
And we're live.
Okay, we are live. Good afternoon. This is the Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2026. We have one very important item on our agenda, which is to hear from folks representing the CDAC, which I want to have the entire name, Capital Debt Authorization Advisory Committee. And that's a committee that meets once a year to look at various economic parameters in the state and recommend what we are authorized to use in our capital bill. And it is advisory, but it is very good practice to take their advice. I think let's go around there. Wendy Harrison, and I represent the Wyndham District.
And I'm Rob Plunkett, Bennington District.
Joe Maker, Windsor District.
Signals, Essex, Orleans District, Northeast Kingdom. John Benson, Orange District.
And a new member. So whoever would like to go first.
Yes, I am. For the record, I am Jeremiah Greer. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the State Treasury. And with me, I have Director Scott Baker. So I've been with the Treasury for a couple of years now. There's a lot to understand in all of this. So if you're asking me a really detailed question, I'm going to phone my friend, Mr. Baker here probably. So just here to give you an overview of the state's debt management and debt authorization practices. So as mentioned, we have the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, or CDAC, and that committee is chaired by the state treasurer. There is the Secretary of Administration is on the board, as is a representative from the Vermont Bond Bank, 2 appointees from the governor, a treasurer appointee, and then the state auditor, as well as the legislative economists, serve on the board as non-voting advisory members. So as mentioned, it meets annually to review the state's net tax supported debt. There is a report each year due by September 30th to the governor and the General Assembly that lays out the recommendation for how much debt to take out in the biennium. By statute, that report is advisory. In practice, it has always been adopted by the legislature and the governor, and the credit rating agencies look very favorably upon the fact that that recommendation is followed. The report looks at the criteria that the credit rating agencies use in evaluating the amount of debt that can be prudently handled by the state. So there are a bunch of different metrics. Chief among them are the amount of debt per capita, the projected debt service as a percentage of revenues, and projected debt outstanding as a percentage of total state income. So in addition to looking at the metrics used by the rating agencies, the CDAC looks at the total amount of outstanding, as well as we were talking about the amount that has been authorized and issued. That looks at that 10-year plan for issuing capital debt. So they're looking at the amount of debt outstanding, how much we can prudently handle based on these metrics, and then also what the needs are in the future. On slide 5, it shows you some benchmarks that the committee looks at. And the state of Vermont is AA rated, so that's the second highest. We're AA+, so that is the second highest credit rating that you can get. When we're benchmarking ourselves, we often compare ourselves against AAA rated states, of which there are 17, and you can see there's a list of AAA rated states there on page 5, slide 5. And slide 6 shows you one of these metrics. So this is looking at the amount of debt per capita, and it's benchmarking Vermont against, again, those AAA rated states. And what you can see here is, I mean, obviously a lower number is lower debt per capita, so a lower number is better here, and a higher number means the higher debt burden. And you can see if that we're benchmarking ourselves against those AAA rated states, that Vermont is one of the higher debt burden states, not completely at the top, but we're kind of in the top, third of states in that ranking. Similarly, slide 7 looks at debt as a percent of personal income, and you can see that Vermont again is sort of in the top third, not all the way in the top, but in the top third, and a little bit above the median for that metric. And then, yes, go ahead.
Do you mind?
Yes, anytime, yes.
So I don't know if everyone has the slides. I think you do. I think you're looking at them. And for those folks who are watching, it's on our website. I just think that having the debt as a percentage of personal income, that's a real meaningful amount to me. And so 2024, so we're at 1.6. And Delaware, the highest one is 6.8. Maryland's 3.9. Minnesota's 2.1. Georgia's 1.8. So some go into like 0.7. But I think that shows that our debt is at a very reasonable place. And this is a great way to measure.
Yes, yeah, it's at a reasonable place. And I mean, this, again, this is benchmarking against like the most top rated states. So if you benchmarked Vermont against sort of our peers, in AA, we'd probably be, even we would look even better by comparison. But I think it's sort of everyone's goal that, if Vermont could improve its credit rating, right, that would be a benefit. And this sort of gives you an idea of like where we would need to be in order to perhaps get to that next echelon of the credit rating.
Yeah, but it also shows that we're not being foolish.
Right, yes. No, I mean, I think that, it sort of gets more into this, in future slides. There are some pluses and some minuses, when it comes to the total, debt, burden in Vermont. But I mean, we do have a little bit more debt than, per capita than some of these AAA rated states, but by no means are we being foolish. I mean, we have very prudent, and disciplined, practices for managing our debt and very, reasonable, debt metrics, which is why, even though we are not AAA, we're AA plus. That AA plus is very solid. There's really no immediate danger that will deteriorate. And the last time that was evaluated with the credit rating agencies, they affirmed that as a stable outlook.
And the premiums are good.
Yes, the premiums are good. Well, actually, Vermont, there is a robust demand for Vermont debt in the market. So we actually sometimes get interest rates that are more comparable to a AAA rated states. So we joke that Maple bonds are really, really sweet in the market. So and part of it is that there just aren't a lot of Vermont bonds issued. So there is, supply and demand in the marketplace, right? But that also indicates that the market has a certain amount of faith, perhaps they're ahead of the credit rating agencies who knows.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So the next slide ranks Vermont against all states. So we're ranking Vermont against those AAA rated states, and here it shows our debt ranking among all of the states. So a higher number is better here. So we're about in the middle of the pack among all states, and you can see that has deteriorated a little bit since 2011 and 2012. And the reason for that is that Vermont has been issuing less debt over time, but some of our other states in the country have been issuing debt. The decline in their debt issuance has been even more steep. And also a lot of states have seen much more robust recoveries in their economies post 2020. But to your point, Senator, to your point, Madam Chair, we are still, in the middle of the pack there. So we are well ahead of the, Illinois of the world for sure. And then the next slide, slide 9, shows you kind of a breakdown of the population of states by their debt rankings. So you can see all the way to the left there, you have the AAA rated states for each of those 3 credit rating agencies. That's where probably a plurality of the states reside. And then the next largest bucket where you can see Vermont is in that AA rated situation. And it just shows you kind of where we fall on the, the peer universe of those rankings. Slide 10 kind of breaks down some of the factors that go into our credit rating. So the economy is something that the credit rating agencies pay a lot of attention to. that is something that is a little bit of a drag on Vermont's rating, in that the credit rating agencies express concern about the demographic situation in Vermont. The aging population is a drag on the economy, and how that will play out in the future. So anything that we can do to attract, younger demographics and, more workers and more children to Vermont is a plus to the credit rating evaluation. Something that we get a lot of credit for is our governance practices. So we have very disciplined history of prudent reserving practices in the budget. They very much like that. We always pass a balanced budget that is looked upon very favorably. They very much so like that we have the BAA process, that there is that mid-year adjustment, and they very much look favorably upon this whole CDAC process. Not only that it exists and that we're evaluating these metrics to determine how much debt is prudent, but also the fact that this recommendation is adopted by the legislature and the governor. The next slide 11, just shows you projections for where some of these metrics are going to go in the future. I won't spend a lot of time here. In a nutshell, Vermont has been issuing less debt, and we expect debt to decline in the future, and so we expect these ratios to all decline, which will be an improvement. Slide 12 shows you a breakdown of the different categories of debt that the state of Vermont has on its books. So the first, largest category, and what we primarily is the focus of the CDAC committee report, is the net tax supported debt. So there's 663 million in net tax supported debt outstanding at the moment. The largest portion of that is 550 million of general obligation bonds. But that amount also includes, there's 26 million of these property tax transfer VHFA bonds, 65 million for leases. So per accounting standards, leases are counted as part of your debt. And then similarly, 22 million in these technology arrangements, these SPIDAs, which are essentially software leases. So these are like long-term subscription agreements that function like a lease, and then, therefore function like debt. So that gets you the 663 in total. Additionally, there is debt issued by instrumentalities of the state that use the state's moral obligation. And so that includes the Vermont Bond Bank and the Housing Finance Agency and VIA. And there's 890 million or 890 million in outstanding of moral obligation bonds. So those are not directly on the state's books or directly backed by the paper credit of the state. They do use the moral obligation. So it is strongly implied that the state has an obligation to support that debt should those organizations not have the cash flow or the assets to do so themselves. Slide 13 shows you kind of a dashboard of some of the metrics that we have gone over in these other slides. I will draw your attention to this rapidity of debt retirement statistics. So this is a measure of how quickly we are paying down our debt, and Vermont gets a lot of credit with the rating agencies for this as well, because we typically take out debt for reasonable amounts of time and pay it off relatively quickly. So this assumes that we issue no more debt. This is just a snapshot in time. So if we stopped issuing debt today, we would pay out almost 50% of it in the next 5 years, 80% of it in the next 10 years, and it would all be gone in 20 years. And of course, we're going to keep issuing debt, so that's not actually going to play out like that. But it gives you this benchmark to show you that we are paying our debt off in a very timely fashion, which is obviously fiscally quite prudent and looked upon favorably.
Just a question.
Yes.
So, that amount, that's the 663 million.
Yes.
So in 20 years, wouldn't you think that we were gonna have, I guess you're just saying that, I'm thinking about the technology arrangements, because those are kind of to infinity in a way, assuming that we're gonna keep having technology.
Well, I think there typically is
But I mean, each
yeah.
one, sorry,
Yeah.
each one is not to infinity. That would not be logical. But I doubt that we're gonna ever not have them,
right.
because they will be renewed.
Yeah, well, I mean, the debt is really the same way, right? Because we're going to keep issuing more debt. But yeah, I mean, I think it takes to account like whatever the contractual period is of whatever the current arrangement is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you may renew that when you get in the end of it, but it's kind of looking at a snapshot in time. But if you have the arrangement for the next 10 years, it's looking at what you have legally obligated yourself to pay for at the moment.
So is it accurate to say that none of those go for longer than 20 years.
I believe that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they're all less than 10.
All less than 10?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And if you think about it, I mean, what that mechanism does is it just sort of says like, you can call something a lease or you can call something a subscription. But like if you're obligated to make payments for X number of years, it's debt, right? And so those subscription agreements are essentially 10-year bonds. So when they mature, when you paid it off, you might issue a new bond, right? I mean, it's sort of like the same.
It's similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can see why it's,
So then, slide 14 shows you the debt authorizations over time. You can see that those have been declining since 2015. The current recommendation, from the CDAC committee is $100 million for the biennium, so 50 million for, both this year and last year. And then slide 15 shows you the amount outstanding. So that's what has been authorized. This is what's been outstanding. You can see that there is quite a difference between what has been authorized and what is outstanding. Kind of circling back to our conversation before about the fact that sometimes debt is authorized, but then it's not able to be utilized because the projects are not completed due to various factors, shortage of contractors or prioritizing other projects or what have you. And then the next slide just shows you the amount of debt outstanding adjusted for inflation, which tells you a pretty similar story. There's a pretty pronounced decline since about 2015 or 2016. And then 2017 shows you the amount authorized and the amount that has been authorized but unissued. And the $192 million bar all the way to the right, that is cumulative. So that is currently, there's currently 192 million that is that has not been issued, that is authorized.
yeah, so, that's not normal. Just, I mean, it's a function of COVID and, all sorts of different things. So that 192 million is not being used. But it's segregated from the rest of,
Right.
yeah, it's,
So there are projects that have been authorized in previous capital bills, but the projects aren't, the money's not being spent right now. So we're not issuing the debt until we're going to spend.
Because within the 5 years or whatever the technical bill says that we have to recall that debt or reissue it through the capital bill. It's money set. Projects we approve, but they aren't shovel ready yet. We've said, here's the project, here's the funding for it, and we're gonna issue the bonds when you are ready to go.
Right. Yeah. When we do a bond issue, a portion of it is for reimbursement for money we've already spent, and we always survey the departments for all of the projects and say how much you're going to spend in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And we'll make a decision. We just issued bonds in December, and some of that money was for reimbursement, and we projected what we could spend out for June of this year. So we went forward basically 6 months. So that's a current bond issue. So that's the general frame.
How fast of a process is that? I'm sorry, I apologize. How fast of a process is it to, once you've made that decision to when the actual bond is issued and there's money in hand?
It probably takes 3 months, 3 or 4 months. Yeah, it's a process.
I have one last question. I apologize. Do we have any restrictions about who can buy our debt?
Restrictions? No.
So
No, it's on the open market, so anybody can. We do have a program, citizen bonds, that is targeted at like most of the bonds are just, they're on the open market, and it's largely institutional investors, the Vanguards and BlackRocks of the world.
Yep.
We do segregate a certain percentage of it for citizen bonds, which are sold in smaller denominations and are targeted towards mom and pop folks, and not 100% of that does go to individuals, because there isn't always enough capacity for those folks to buy it. But that is an effort to try to get normal people to be able to buy them. And so there in that bucket, there's a preference towards those individuals, but even there, it's not like a hard and fast rule that it can't be bought by other folks. It's more so like if we get to more orders than we need, then we will prioritize those individuals.
very expensive.
I just
following up on what Senator Engel said, I assume then that would apply to like the woman's prison. That would be what's counted in that, because we aren't really approved the money for it, but we aren't at a point to actually implement that.
Right, yeah, a portion of that authorized but unissued is for the women's prison, for previous capital bills, it's correct.
But we have not, this does not include the total amount. Is my understanding.
Only what's been authorized.
Right,
I
but,
think it's, yeah, maybe 15 million.
yeah, that was 15 or 20, yeah.
Yeah, so whatever, like cumulatively, whatever's been approved in capital bills passed that hasn't been spent is what that 192 is. So only a portion of the women's prison was in the capital bill. But
Right, and that's,
Yeah.
and we've had it in multiple capital bills at, a certain amount, or differing amounts.
Right.
yeah,
But my understanding is we don't have the complete amount yet. And I am asking questions about why can't we start the process, because we know we're going to get the complete amount.
yeah, I mean, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also like, you know, if a project, I mean, a project doesn't have to be complete for us to bond for it either, right? I mean, if you're starting to spend money, we can reimburse that money, so that's another, you know,
Okay.
consideration, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll talk about that more later. Is that okay? Okay, keep going, please.
All right,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So the thought on that is if we, let's say the women's prison is $100 million, was the last number I heard. And we have 15, would you bond the other 85? I mean,
I think so we can bond, in order for us to bond, the project has to be authorized in a capital bill, and then you have to actually spend the money. So if you put 15 million in the capital bill.
Yeah.
And then you spend $5 million of it, we can bond for $5 million. So we can use the state's cash to pay the bill and then issue the bond proceeds and reimburse that afterwards.
I see.
We can also, as Scott was mentioning, so there's like the reimbursement process. There's also, if we have, reason to believe that the money is going to be spent, in the next, is it 12 months, 18 months?
Generally 18 months, but it's like 36 if it's finally placed into service. They're different. Generally 18 months.
So anyway, we can, if
18 months before the shovel hits the ground, or 18 months before the shovel project?
it's before the money is spent.
I see.
So it's all about like cash flows.
Gotcha.
So what happens is, not to get too far in the weeds, but if we, when we bond, we get cash, right? And if we have that cash and it's not either reimbursing capital projects that have been spent or soon to be spent on capital projects, then we end up having to essentially pay a tax on it to the federal government, because you're issuing this tax exempt debt, which has a lower interest rate than like what we're earning on our deposits in the bank. And that's the whole reason for this, is that the federal government doesn't want you to do that. So they have these tax rates about using the money on either end.
Well, that's good to know. Good question. Yes.
And what makes a determination about how long you bond for? Is it a set amount every time, or you're saying whatever, you're looking at market conditions, or what? So, what the length of time of a bond, what makes that decision? Do you guys make that decision? Obviously.
No, so for the general obligation bonds, which are anything in the capital bill, we issue GO bonds for. It's in statute that we will issue 20-year bonds.
Okay, so it has to be 20 years. I mean, because I know that that's the statute of how we do it, but it is always 20.
Yes, and
Okay.
they also have to be in equal or diminishing principal payments. So say we issued $100 million, we would have $5 million maturing each year for 20 years.
Sure.
If it's, has to go down, if it's 95 million, the last maturity or two would be a little bit less. Now, we did issue the transportation infrastructure bonds back in 2010, 12, and 13. Those were 3 smaller issues, but those we could issue up to 30-year bonds for those. But those were special revenue bonds from a portion of the gas tax or whatever.
And as we've gone to a cash system on some of what we're spending on there, we're using some of that cash to pay off bonds early. There's no prepayment penalty.
Correct. Right, yeah, usually whenever we do a bond issue, we always look at refunding opportunities as well. And we'll get to the last slide, but this last issue, we had a portion, we issued one series of bonds, which was for new money for projects. We had another one, refunding bonds, which is basically like refinancing your mortgage. You issue bonds at lower rates, pay off some of the older ones. Which, when we issue, generally there's kind of like a 10-year lockout. So once we issue them, we can't refund that issue for 10 years. And then once they're refundable, we kind of look at those. So
And I apologize for dominating a lot of questions here, but what would typically be an interest rate on a bond that somebody would buy? What type of return would they be looking to make on a bond?
Usually between, I mean, it fluctuates, but it's been between 3 and 4% in the mid threes. So when we, and it changes every day.
No, it does, yeah.
But, when we're refunding, so like Scott said, the bonds have to be at least 10 years old because we have they're non-callable for that period. But then we're doing an analysis, of what the original coupon and interest rate was on the bond, and then what we think we can get in the market now to figure out if it actually makes sense. So if we're going to be able to save money by refunding, then we do. Otherwise, yes, obviously we don't, but that's all dependent on market conditions as well.
So it wouldn't be outrageous to say that it's, the economy is, if it improves like looks like it might, that we might be going back to retire some of those older bonds with new bonds because of a lower interest rate?
The last couple of years, we have done several retirements, or, we issue new bonds to pay off the old ones, and we're saving money. So yeah, every time we go out to issue, we do an evaluation of looking at all the bonds that are currently outstanding and looking at what the interest rates and coupons on those bonds are versus what we think the market is going to do to see if there are any opportunities. And I mean, sometimes there aren't, right? And sometimes there are. And so whenever there is, then we, when we do a bond issue, we'll just do a portion of it as a refunding issue. And, if we can save a couple $1 million or whatever, then obviously that's free money. So.
Okay,
So slide 18, looks at Vermont's rankings, of debt burden among the 50 states when taking into account, pension and OPEB liabilities as part of the debt. And you can see that a higher number here is better. So you can see that we have some of the higher burdens as a percentage of our state gross domestic product and per capita when it comes to OPEB and pension liabilities. So the credit rating agencies have started to pay a lot more attention to those liabilities, and in Vermont, those liabilities are larger than our actual GO debt. And so there's been a lot of work, as I'm sure you know, in the last few years to get both the OPEB and the pensions on a plan to pay off that debt. So the pensions will be paid off in the 2030s, and the OPEBs will be paid off in the 2040s. So we got a few more years, but as we continue to pay off those liabilities, that is also something that will lift our credit rating. And then the next slide is similarly just showing a ranking of Vermont as it considers these rankings, and showing you these liabilities as a percentage of personal income and state GDP. And you can see that we are somewhat of an outlier in that we have very high ratios in that regard, but we're making a lot of progress in paying off those debts. And then just to kind of drive this home a little bit more, on slide 10, it's showing you these colored bars. If you take the state's total liabilities, so the OPEB, the pension, the GO debt, the net tax supported debt, and showing you the components of the total. And you can see that the green and the orange red color would be the pension pieces, and you can see that the net tax supported debt is very much so dwarfed actually by that. And you can see that we are you know, again, kind of in the top third, if you rank all the states for their, you know, total amount of debt.
So the capital bill is the little,
The capital
or
bill,
in the blue. one.
yes, the capital bill is part of the little blue one. So that's, you know, so that's just a really interesting consideration, you know, because you've got 600 and, you know, was it 630 million in, you know, net tax supported debt, but the OPEB and pension liabilities are in the billions, right? So, continuing to make the ADEX on those and continuing to pay them down, is very much so important. And a few years ago, there was less attention on this from the rating agencies, but they've really started to factor this more into their ratings for obvious reasons. So just a plug for our continued efforts to pay down those liabilities. And then just this next slide 21 goes over a little bit the CDEC recommendation. So the CDEC had put out a preliminary recommendation of 100 million when it did the 2024 report, because we project out in the future what we think the recommendations were to be. And then that was affirmed in the latest report. So it's 100 million for the current biennium. So 50 million is the recommendation for 26 and 27. And one of the things that keeps the CDEC from recommending higher amounts is just the inability to spend the money. The state actually probably has a greater capacity to take on debt, but it's the ability to actually get the money spent.
Yeah, let's just make sure that, because my understanding is it's that we haven't been able to use the authority that we've already
Yeah.
had, and
Yeah.
that's a relatively new situation.
Yes. Yeah, and I think like you said, it's very influenced by COVID. I mean, I think it's the pipeline of contractors to get the work done. I think it's also the limited amount of labor of state employees to be able to manage those projects, and also the fact that we have to spend all of the federal money that we received for stimulus money in the pandemic by the end of 2026. And so those projects are prioritized because that money expires over, you know, perhaps spending state money.
Thank you.
And then to your question, Senator Ingalls, on this last page, it just shows, you know, last time we went out to issue that we were able to do 66 million in refunding and at a net present value savings of $2.3 million.
That would be fun.
Good.
Yeah, so that was the one.
Those were good days.
Yes, they're very good days.
And also those show the two series, what the TIC, which is the true interest cost. So among the 20-year bond, our overall cost was about 3.58% interest. Again, those are 20-year bonds. The refunding is a little bit lower because remember, we're locked out for 10 years. So those are basically 10-year, 1 to 10 year maturities. So up 2.5%. So still very good rates, higher than the last issue we did. But still historically very good interest rates. So.
So that's an overview of the CDEC. I also, the treasurer asked me if I would give you guys a heads up on some language in the treasurer's omnibus bill about the CDEC. Just some minor changes to the statute there. So I can go over that unless you have any other questions about the CDEC presentation.
Yeah, just one sec. I think these are all the same, right? Is this for everybody?
Sorry?
Are these for every, are these? They look like they're all the same.
Yeah, those are all.
Okay.
I have.
Or you don't need one? Did you?
Yeah.
So is this what you want us to look at next?
Oh, there's one
Oh, this
page,
is-
there's a separate page.
I think-
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you guys didn't have it for you. Yeah, this is what we just. This is what we just.
Right. Okay, so we have a bunch of those,
But
but
then
I
you
think
guys
I
have-
gave away.
There might be a one. I mean, it's fairly simple. I can also just go over it verbally, but it
Okay,
might be like a one pager that was part of all that as well.
Yeah, there was separate. Yeah, that's,
There you
Yes.
go.
that's it.
Yes, those.
okay. Great. So does anybody want this?
That's just 2 pages taken out of the omnibus bill, so it's not the whole thing, but it's.
Yep.
Thank you.
So just two very minor changes to the CDAC statute. So one you can see there is adding this language, crossing out this language that says other, well, the committee will consider, it used to say other metrics at the committee's discretion, crossing out that committee's discretion piece and putting in metrics adopted by bond rating agencies. So just recognizing that the metrics that the rating agencies use change and just giving the committee the flexibility to use whatever metrics that rating agencies are using. And then on the next page, so it used to say that we'd consider capital asset depreciation ratio reflecting unfunded capital maintenance costs, and just inserting this language, it says we will consider measuring reflecting the remaining useful life of state infrastructure and the potential for future capital maintenance and replacement costs. So just a little bit of a finer point on considering the the deferred maintenance of state buildings and infrastructure. Happy to take any questions about that as well.
So are these defined the depreciation ratio that's defined somewhere, right? So you're choosing not to use that?
Is that,
Yeah, I think
I believe it is in the bill, but yeah, again, this is just 2 pages, in the bill, but yeah, we'll make sure that.
I'm just curious about.
well, I think it's giving us the flexibility to use that and other measures of useful life, I would think, because I think the depreciation ratio is one measure reflecting the remaining useful life of infrastructure, and it's just sort of giving a little bit more flexibility there.
Because it includes future capital maintenance and replacement costs,
Yes,
not just,
right.
okay. I don't have any questions now, anybody? Okay,
Awesome.
all right.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we have another person coming. Michael.
Hi there.
There he is.
Oh, hey, Michael.
Hello.
So Michael, do you have anything we should be looking at, or will you be just talking with us?
No, I didn't plan to provide a presentation, but I can introduce myself and give a few follow-up comments.
Yeah, that would be great if you don't mind. And thank
Sure.
you for being here.
Yeah, so nice to meet everyone. Michael Gahn, I'm the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. Our relevance to this conversation is kind of twofold. On one hand, we kind of flip-flop with the state in terms of the most debt outstanding, depending on where they are in that cycle of reimbursing expenditures that was discussed. And so I don't know where the state is after the December issuance. I think somewhere around 720 million or something like that. But we're at about 755 million outstanding or so. And just to give you sort of economy or a sense of size and scale, and we're in the market at least twice every year, if not more. So I have a pretty good handle on what's going on with munis generally. We have the bond bank as an organization has a I guess like statutory seat on CDAC, in large part because we're the largest user of the state's moral obligation, and that's effectuated via a debt service reserve fund on our bonds. The way that works is that if our debt service reserve fund was ever depleted for any reason, then we notify the governor, and the governor requests of you all an appropriation to backfill that. That's never happened. Never expect that it will, but it is a very helpful credit enhancement tool. And we, the state treasurer and the governor approve our bond issuances for that reason because of this state credit enhancement. But we're actually underway right now to reduce our use of the state's moral obligation. But regardless, as it relates to CDAC, our other form of credit enhancement is what's called a state intercept, whereby if a borrower in our portfolio does not pay us, we can ask the treasurer to redirect state aid funds to the bond bank to backfill that debt service. Another tool that's never been used, but is extremely useful. And both of those tools together result in the fact that our rating on our bonds is essentially a derivative of the state. So, for example, the state is AA plus. S&P. We're AA plus S&P. The state is AA one, I believe. Moody's, and we are AA2, just a notch off that. And that is because of the quality of the state's rating. So we're very vested in the state maintaining a high rating, and as a result, local government in Vermont as well as school districts benefit from that high rating. And so I have done, just two, I guess, things to add to the Jeremiah and the comments that Jeremiah and Scott gave. I am our bond bank's representative to CDAC. This sort of I guess overwhelming money that has come through the system has been very material to the decision of CDAC to really lower debt authorization levels over the last couple of years, past two bienniums. But there's no avoiding the fact that construction costs, in the Northeast on indices have risen by over, nearly 50% since COVID. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to be grappling with in the coming years, and is a noteworthy addition to this conversation. And is one reason there was some, really mild congenial disagreement on the CDAC recommendation this past session. The other thing is that uh, while it's not an explicit category in the rating agency analysis to date, it's certainly something that's discussed with management. The deferred maintenance is being viewed, which is, part of I think I'm very supportive of the language that Jeremiah discussed, because that's going to increasingly be a topic of consideration for the rating agencies. The think tanks in the public finance space are already very focused on this. There's been some big reports that have come out recently, and I think some folks are viewing it like the new pension, essentially. Going back to really the great financial crisis is where it came to a head. The rating agencies and the public finance industry spent a lot of time thinking about unfunded pension liabilities, which is obviously stimulated a lot of conversations in Montpelier. And folks are starting to view deferred maintenance the same way. There's a note in the CDAC report that overall debt levels from states have gone down, and to some degree that was because they were using pay-as-you-go, through, in the period prior to COVID. But there's probably a suspicion that some of that was also deferred maintenance. And so I think we're going to see more credit attention on deferred maintenance generally. And so I also think it's something that we need to spend some time thinking about. Oregon, for example, has a component. By the way, we're one of 23 states that have a debt affordability committee, and it's really like A+ practice in the industry. And so we need to continue to do this, to have the legislature respect the report, and it's incredibly important. But there are, some things that other states are doing that are interesting. Oregon has a FCI score that they consider for their buildings to sort of get a handle on deferred maintenance, and to some degree we have that with the BGS projection that Scott mentioned. And then also, and this is going to be, I think, part of the next biennium, is taking into account our pension liabilities. So Rhode Island is an example of a small state that also does that. And as you saw by the numbers, the pension liability and the annual contributions required of that really crowd out or overwhelm the debt service number. And so, there's a plausible argument that we could have some additional debt issuance without really stressing anything, because the pension number is just frankly so big. But yeah, and that's a trade-off, right? Like you gotta stay ahead of things. Like we obviously need to pay off that pension liability, but we also want to make sure that we're not sort of digging a hole at the same time on deferred maintenance. So I think those are just some like highlights, but generally just wanted to reiterate how important CDAC is, and following the recommendation. And as we look at really major facilities and infrastructure problems in the state, like school construction, maintaining the state's rating is extremely important to lower the cost of that endeavor. we expect that that debt will be issued through the bond bank. But again, we are a derivative of the state. We can probably, as it relates to school construction, take on more debt than the state could without a rating impact, and really kind of leverage the state's rating. So it is very, very important to what we do, and keeping tax bills lower for all communities in Vermont.
Michael, it sounded like you just gave us don't cross those two lines, which was higher retirement pension debt and also being able to make sure that we were able to get our work done, construction costs, and don't get it built up too high. And if those numbers were to go up, that we would be looking at different scenarios as far as with a rating, with a rating. Did I read that right? Is that what I heard? Is there
Yeah,
to that?
I think, yeah, more or less the one caveat or the one nuance might just be that I think in reading, and I don't see this firsthand, but in reading what's going on with the transportation fund, and in this one thing where in the one limitation to CDAC is we are sort of operating in isolation. I think there's like a reasonable there's a reasonable concern about getting into your business with as it relates to the capital bill. But at the same time, like the two things need to speak to each other, the sources and the uses. It might be appropriate to have more sources in the short term so that we can be better off in the long term if we can get ahead of some type of capital spending. And so, that is one area where I think there's it's a little tricky to get the full picture because it is so multifaceted. There are so many parts of state government involved in that conversation. But I think the one that's noteworthy right now is just transportation. We've essentially retired the transportation infrastructure bonds, and not knowing, if where we're headed with that. Is interesting, is of note. And so I think if there was, from my perspective, not to speak for the committee, there's one small area that would benefit from a little more information. It's just better understanding any potential deferred maintenance statewide. But that's also a very challenging task because it is so multifaceted, so interdisciplinary, and that kind of thing.
All right, this is helpful. I just about deferred maintenance. So in transportation, I think we have a pretty good handle on that just because of the roads and bridges. VTrans has a good listing of the age of these facilities. So in other types of state assets, are there parameters and metrics and methods for determining deferred maintenance? Because that can mean different things to different people.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know the answer to that, and that is why I think the language Jeremiah suggests is important. Like asset depreciation level is like a book value and may not represent the actual useful life of those assets, and so it's important we have experts evaluate that rather just having what is essentially an accounting number. So that's the only thing I'd say. I think my only comment on the transportation side, yes, it's required. It's very important. I think my question would just be like, if you were to accelerate some of that spending, what does it mean in the long run in terms of costs over time? And that's something we just don't know necessarily, given we have no debt in the transportation fund today.
Right. No, that's a good point. Actually, in transportation, if it goes past a certain amount, it's much more expensive to fix it. It's much more in the long term cost effective to keep it at a something better than the middle.
How does the bond bank and the people associated with buying bonds, how do they look at like what we have? Because I know other states either don't bond at all or they do have a cash fund. Is that helpful with when people are looking at us to have the cash fund, like how we've used it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's kind of the trade-off. So we look at our, I can't speak sort of for all investors, but one thing we look at the bond bank are portfolio medians and, the kind of the debt ratios we have at the community level. And on one hand, they all look terrific, right? There's like virtually no debt. You're like, oh, that's great. But then at the same time, like, what's the unspoken thing about deferred maintenance? And so that's always the question. So to the extent there's a dedicated pay-as-you-go program, and that's actually working, that's terrific, and you're staying up with things, and so that's the key question, because it's very painful to have cash sitting there, right, and be used for capital in the budgeting process. Takes a lot of discipline, but yeah, certainly that's helpful.
Any other questions, comments? All right, well, this has been very helpful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll follow up on this conversation. We'll have more. I mean, we'll need to discuss your language. And then I want to talk more about the funding that's already been set aside, and specifically like the women's prison. So that'll be something that we'll be working on sometime. All right, anything else from
Thank you.
anyone?
Thank you
Okay, we
very
will
much. Very good. Very good
adjourn.
report.
Thank you.
Thank you.